You're listening to Generation AI
from Live Person.
Hello, Generation AI listeners. Ruth Zive here. I am so excited to bring you another great episode. Before we get started, I want to remind you to hit that subscribe button and leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app. I want to feel your love. Today, our guest is Chris Miller, the VP of Product Growth and AI at Hubspot. Now, as a marketer, I've been a HubSpot fan for more years than I care to admit. Chris is a longtime leader at this company, and I'm excited to have him with us today. We're going to cover a lot of ground, everything from his career journey to his thoughts on democratizing AI. So let's get into it. Welcome to Generation AI, Chris.
Ruth, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get to talk to you on Generation AI. It's awesome.
Awesome. It's our pleasure. I want to jump right in, and I like to start with a little bit of background. Maybe share with our listeners, Chris, when you first started to see that AI was really making a mark on the world, or even that it was something that you should have in mind as you consider your career pursuits. Even just like your first memory of thinking, wow, this is something I should really start paying attention to.
Yeah, for sure. So, my background on the product side is primarily in growth, right? Like I've been a growth product manager for a large part of my career. I've sort of helped build and lead the growth product function at HubSpot for many years now. And so my first like real engagement with an application of AI that impacted me directly wasn't actually generative AI. It was closer to machine learning, right? It was the first time I learned about contextual multi-arm bandit and how it could be used for stat acceleration. And that seemed like, such an improvement over old school A/B testing, which was sort of where I really cut my teeth early on. And I was like, okay, there's something deeper here that is really interesting in terms of ways in which we're able to leverage data to do way more than we've been capable of doing in the past. But, at HubSpot, where, our mission is to build the best customer platform for scaling businesses and front office go-to-market teams, it was obvious that Gen AI specifically was going to be disruptive to our category and to the world, from really the moment ChatGPT went live to the rest of the world. And it's like, obviously the initial content creation use cases, even the most basic ones were like pretty mind blowing for someone who had never seen anything like that before in real life. And it was pretty obvious that the rules were being rewritten. But, in my problem space specifically, which is product led growth, AI's arrival also pushed us to revisit a lot of product challenges around building like a freemium CRM, because it presented opportunities for solutions that either like didn't exist or would have been extremely costly to build, right? Like some of the fundamental problems around trying to onboard a customer into a CRM was like data entry, data mapping, content segmentation, and personalization at scale when you have like a big top of the funnel and you can't be one size fits all. Like how do you actually deliver like a tailored crafted experience to each and every person who comes in through your front door? And then like coaching and instruction, right? So, once you started to see some of the possibilities, it took these problems that we've been banging our heads against the wall with for a really long time and sort of like breathed a bit of new life into us as a team to sort of say, okay, cool. Like this is actually going to fundamentally change the way that both customers think about products in our category, but also how the next generation of competitors building in this category are going to approach solving these problems. So we're going to have to really shift our mentality and start to try to understand AI and how we can leverage it most effectively. That was like the wake up moment for us.
I feel like you've covered a fairly long time horizon there, from like the first time when you sort of started thinking practically about AI generally. I imagine that was probably several years ago versus the tsunami of interest and enthusiasm around generative AI that's been front and center for, almost a couple of years now. The way I think about it is that a lot of us were thinking about AI. Those of us that work in tech recognized that AI was going to change the way we build, change the way we work. But it was really generative AI that unlocked that in a way that made it seem possible quickly and efficiently and affordably. Do you think that's a fair way of framing it?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I found it to be highly relatable even to the person who's not in tech, right? Like when I first used, it might have been like Jasper, right? Like one of the early products that had put a UI over GPT before ChatGPT had been available to the public. It was one of those things that you showed it to someone and they immediately understood it, right? Because when you think about every like language has like a phrase for like writer's block, right? Like it's such a relatable problem that humans experience, which is I'm staring at a blank canvas. How do I get started? And so when you have the right prompts and you're able to give it bits and pieces of the things in your brain that's able to articulate that into a more complete thought, like that feels like magic. And the barrier to entry being so low. And then you have ChatGPT, which really democratized the consumer's ability to use AI for like everyday use cases. That to me was like the firing gun for like the beginning of like the AI revolution. It's like, okay, cool. This isn't just going to be something that gets talked about in like niche tech communities. This is going to be something that like every person, maybe not every person, but surely a lot of people who deal with like the internet on a daily basis are going to be interested in. I mean, I think like the moment when I think about when the news articles started to come out about how students were using AI to circumvent like the rules in academia. It's like, okay, cool. This is now mainstream, right? Like this isn't something that just tech workers and knowledge workers are thinking about. It has applications beyond building software in B2B SaaS, and it's going to be real for a large swath of the population.
I'll push you a step further because I have a college age son who absolutely embraced that use case for ChatGPT. He studies computer science, so he was maybe on the leading edge. But I knew that this was going to be really groundbreaking when it wasn't just my tech savvy 20-year-old computer science studying son who was doing these day-to-day things with ChatGPT, but my 80-year-old father was also sort of interested and experimenting and exploring and could certainly understand the real world application of this tech. So I totally hear you there. You mentioned this idea of democratization of AI. So, and what that means sort of to individuals in broad strokes. Maybe talk a little bit more about that, what it means to business leaders. I'd love some examples from the work that you do, and maybe with some more detail as well. How is this going to change our lives very practically? What does it mean that it's become democratized?
That's a great question. When we think about, and when I think about democratizing I think about this, at least from a business standpoint, on like two dimensions. The first is cost, right? Something this disruptive, something this important shouldn't be so cost prohibitive that it locks those with less means completely out of the revolution, right? And historically, that hasn't always been the case. When there's sort of new shifts in technology, usually that's gated, and especially in the context of B2B or even B2C, it's like larger players get access first, and the smaller players wait until the second harvest of technology happens to be able to play. And luckily, like that's sort of what we're already doing at HubSpot, right? We embedded HubSpot AI across our entire platform, and it's available across all the hubs, and it comes with it comes with HubSpot, and that's part of our ethos as a company, right? That's part of our commitment to helping small businesses grow better. And when we think about our promise to small businesses and sort of how AI is going to impact that, like we don't see a future of necessarily less large businesses. We see a future of more small businesses. And so the cost factor as an element of democratization is a really major one. The second is complexity. The best technology should be intuitive. It shouldn't take an advanced degree to set up, get configured, and extract value. You shouldn't necessarily need a dedicated team of highly specialized individuals in order to administrate that technology. And so a focus on intuitiveness and ease of use is also, I think, an important element of what it means to truly democratize technology. And then lastly, another way I think about democratization in the context of AI is that I think it's going to usher in the age of ideas. Um, Previously, I think if you wanted to bring an idea to life, you had to have the idea, the thought, right? Like the creative juice. But then you also had to have the skill set to use tools to manifest that idea, right? So if I had a vision for something that was illustrative in nature, then I needed to probably know how to use like Adobe Illustrator, or I needed to be a graphic designer. Or if I had an idea for a song, I needed to know how to sing or play an instrument. Or if I had an idea for a movie, I needed to know how to cast and produce and screenwrite and do all these things, right? And so you had people who were ideas people, but then you often had people who were the doers, whose job is to take that idea and translate it and turn it into something that's actually tangible. And what's interesting about AI is that it's actually democratizing the ability to take ideas and make them come to life, right? Like so many of these cool uh, tools. One tool that I've been using a lot is like Suno.ai. I actually use it to create jingles for my son, right? Like he loves to sing, and so we just make up random songs, and it's really cool. But because I'm not that great at singing myself, right? And so I think what's going to end up happening is uh, once the means to create tangible things, that barrier to entry is sort of removed, the best ideas are going to start to bubble to the top. And that's another way in which I think about the democratization of AI. It's that AI is going to actually democratize creativity in a lot of ways and usher in the age of ideas versus the age of tools.
Yeah, so much interesting stuff there to unpack. It sounds to me like you're saying that on the one hand, for AI to be democratized, really and you cited two areas of consideration, but it's about access. Access in terms of affordability, access in terms of skill set, access in terms of usability. And so it's really about, it has to be accessible to the masses in a really easy, streamlined way. And I think we're certainly getting there. Um, but then the flip side of that coin is, what is the output of that accessibility? And what you've noted, which is super interesting, is that because it's democratized, it's actually giving voice to the masses in a way that they never could express or articulate in the past, creatively, from in terms of sharing of opinions. It really is very exciting, scary in some ways. And, we could have a whole other podcast about, safety considerations, regulation, diversity of opinion, all of those things. But I think that you've really captured this idea of democratization relative to AI in a really interesting way. I want to go back to you mentioned about HubSpot and how really your focus is on SMB, although I know you have many enterprise customers. But has it changed? Has the introduction of generative AI in particular in the last year or two changed the way you think about the market opportunity? And what are the big differences from your perspective? I mean, I work with large enterprise, mostly in highly regulated industries, and there's no question there's nuance there when it comes to the usage and adoption of Gen AI. What do you see in the SMB market, and how has the availability of this technology shifted perspective on that front?
Totally. I mean, when you think about historically, getting back to even democratization, like the barrier to entry, even starting a business was relatively high, right? And in order to actually like grow and scale that business, an SMB had to rely on having more, right? Like you need to have more resources, more domain expertise, more people. And like today, that approach is sort of bloated. It slows teams down, and it actually inhibits growth in a very real way. And so, we believe that SMBs stand to benefit tremendously from AI. But there's the other reality that we're balancing, which is that the technology is probably going to outpace general readiness in terms of adoption. The technology, like I don't think we've seen any other revolution where the technology improves at a pace this rapid, right? And so that's something that I think a lot of companies are experiencing. Um, in terms of like HubSpot's customer base and what we're seeing specifically, right? Like our base covers a wide range of businesses. And and even though we sort of have like an enterprise segment, it's still what the average person would consider to be SMBs. And so it's early innings, but most of the customers that we see adopting are early adopters. You would say in just the general like adoption curve. We talked to a lot of like SMB founders, and my experience is that like most don't use AI, and many have heard of AI because it's in the news, but they couldn't tell you what it is or why they should care about it, right? And that's gonna change naturally, right? And that's sort of like what you would expect is that for the person who's wearing a bunch of different hats and they're just trying to figure out how to make payroll or they're just trying to figure out how to get through the next quarter, like oftentimes, even if it's sort of paradigm shifting technology, creating the space to actually learn about it and dig into it and understand it feels just like another task on their list of things to do, right? And we can go. I have some thoughts about for any founders or you know leaders listening on ways that you can sort of like combat that. But when we see adoption today, it's mostly coming from sort of like the upper end of the part of the market that we serve, and it's sort of a top down exercise, right? Like there's an AI evangelist or a champion internally, somebody who lives and breathes this stuff. And they're the ones who are sort of driving adoption internally, persuading leadership to invest in AI heavily. And that's sort of the general stage that we think we're in, right? Like bottoms up adoption, generally from like creators independently adopting or frontline workers, sort of trying to figure out ways in which to leverage AI to make their workflows more efficient is just a little bit slower than companies who come in and there's someone who sits in an important seat and is like, hey, we're going to do this thing. You're in charge of figuring out what that thing is. AI champion. Now go and figure out how we become an AI company.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it. There seems to be consensus across the board, and at LivePerson, we see this in large enterprise. So in that sense, not that different than SMB, that generative AI is a technology that they should be thinking about. That there's, acceptance that this is likely going to change the world. It can potentially save them money, drive better efficiency, all of those things. And there's very little understanding of how to do that. Um, what are the steps that I need to undertake as a CEO or business leader or frontline worker for that matter to actually drive the business outputs that this technology promises it can deliver? And so I completely agree with you. I think there's a real appetite right now in the market for prescriptive playbooks along those lines, instructions on what to do. So let's hear from you, Chris Miller. Imagine that I'm a CEO of a small business, forget about the industry, but what are some of the initiatives that I should be undertaking or introducing to my company so that I can make sure that I take advantage of this new technology? What would you tell me to do practically?
I probably have three pieces of advice. Number one is if the AI champion exists at your company, figure out who that person is. Find the person who's passionate about this, who spends a lot of their time, any free time they have, keeping up to date with the latest and greatest, and elevate that person. Like, let them be your advanced scout. Let them be the person who goes out and does the research and due diligence and talks to internal teams and understands the needs and wants of the business, and let that person, you know, be the person to usher on or usher in the age of AI for your company. Like, finding somebody who's deeply entrenched in what's happening with AI is like one of the easiest things you can do, and elevate that person, give that person the ability to actually make some impact. The second thing is, if you were building AI solutions for your customers, focus on sharp pains that they have. It can be really tempting to want to pursue things that make for like attractive demos, right? But ultimately, I think for it to matter to your customers, it still needs to solve a problem. At the end of the day, they probably just see AI as a tool, not some magical panacea of a silver bullet that's going to make all their problems go away. It still has to map very concretely to like a pain point that they're experiencing in the everyday. So like I wouldn't use AI as an excuse to toss focusing on customer pain to the wayside. And the third is, I think the best way to understand AI, if you think of yourself as someone on the margins, is like by building habits around using it every day. Build it into your daily routine. It's hard to evaluate something if you don't really understand it. One of the first things that I did was, when I knew I needed to build some habits around using AI, is I actually took the Google app on my phone and I moved it and I replaced it with the ChatGPT app. And it was because I was operating, I'm a creature of habit. Like, I operate off muscle memory. I know if I swipe once and click my thumb in this exact spot, it's going to pop open Google. And it's not to say that, this is like GPT 3.5. It's not to say that GPT 3.5 was even able to do the job I needed it to do in every instance. But what I quickly learned were the things that it was actually really good at, and the places in which it would fall flat on its face almost comically at times, right? And so building basic habits around using AI to just better understand it, I think is going to equip leaders to be better at understanding the way it can impact their customers and impact the overall sort of scale and efficiency of their own business, right? And when we think about that at HubSpot, like, that's why we're focusing on trying to make AI approachable and trying to provide that fast and obvious value. Because like, while we ultimately do care about the power users, right? Like, we actually are even more obsessed with like winning over the people who are on the margins, right? Like SMBs and the folks who can't afford to be left behind. And so if that resonates with you, one of the best things you can do is start to build it into your daily routine.
I love all three tips. I would add one more, which is, once you've identified a use case that speaks to your customer's pain, I think that's great advice. Set a target and measure what the impact is of this experiment or of this rollout. So if you think it's going to drive better efficiency in some way, measure that efficiency gain. If you think it's going to save money, measure it. If you think it's going to drive revenue, measure it. If you think it's going to lead to better satisfaction of some segment of your customer base, measure it. Because I think that feedback loop will inspire you to do more as you gain confidence about the impact that you're having with the technology. So I love your tips. Very practical. As we start to wrap up this discussion, I'd love to hear from you what you're most excited about when it comes to AI as you kind of look to the future. And then on the other hand, what really keeps you up at night?
Wow. Okay. I'm most excited about, it's probably a toss up between like larger context windows and multimodal, but I'm going to go with multimodal. I think multimodal is going to be really, really important in the next generation of sort of like AI applications that we see over the coming, I wouldn't even say years, I would say months. I think it's going to be necessary to truly unlock voice as an input method into AI applications and use cases that like even at HubSpot, we tend to care a lot about. But being able to interpret not just written text, but audio, by way of voice, tonal changes, natural speech patterns, and even facial expressions, I think is going to make sort of like real time sentiment analysis an interesting tool to apply across like a variety of use cases. So I think multimodal is something that definitely excites me. Like larger context windows are cool. I think there's a bunch of interesting, endless possibilities when you can import like massive data sets into a prompt. But I think multimodal is going to be the thing that has the most immediate like consumer and end user impact in
And you
terms of
think
like the
months,
next
not years. That's
months.
that's a
Yeah,
bold statement.
yeah, not years, months
Okay,
for
we're
sure.
gonna check in 6 months' time. Mark in my calendar. What keeps you up at night, Chris?
um,
When it comes to AI specifically.
I was like, I am. I think I mentioned this. I have a another kid on the way in a few weeks, so that's the thing currently keeping me up at night. But with
Oh well,
regards,
in the next couple months you'll be way more awake at night.
exactly, I won't have any time to sleep. Exactly. Uh, Governance probably or lack thereof, and sort of like what is the right path forward. I think we're already seeing reports of AI being used for like propaganda, misinformation, and like the things that aren't necessarily good for society writ large. I'll just say, right, and you can only hope that we can figure out a way to do reasonable, informed, and educated regulation that can put the right protections and safeguards into place. But I think there's going to be a period where that's going to be top of mind for a lot of people, and rightfully so, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. Chris, we are at the stage of the podcast where we do our hype it or hate it segment. So our producer is going to put 60 seconds on the clock for each of us to rant. The rules, just to remind you, are that you can be positive and negative about something in the world of AI or business, but we only have 60 seconds to explain what we're all heated about or loving this week.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes. Who's going to go first?
I think Ruth is going to go first. So, Ruth, I'm going to put 60 seconds on the clock. I will let you know when you have 30 seconds left. I will let you know when you have 10 seconds left. And then a buzzer will sound when your time is up. So, are you ready? All right. Your time starts now.
Okay, so today I'm in the mood to hype something. I think I've been hating on a lot of stuff lately. And what I'm going to hype is a little known app from the Royal Bank of Canada, RBC, a live person customer, and a Canadian brand that's very near and dear to my heart. The app is called Mido. And in a nutshell, it's an app that sort of allows parents to give their younger kids some autonomy over money management without introducing the risk that you would have if you just
30
gave them
seconds.
cash or a debit card or a credit card. I'll spare you the details, but it is a really elegant, simple user experience. And the reason I want to hype it is because I have an adult daughter with Down syndrome, and Mido has allowed her to have financial independence without risk, and it has truly been a blessing in her life. So Mido doesn't use AI that I know of, but I'm hyping it because it's a great example of a technology that solves a problem in a really meaningful way and actually changes lives.
Okay. Chris, you also have a chance to weigh in on Ruth's topic. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it sounds like I love that you chose that product because it sounds like it does have some like deeply personal ties. And I think the best products are the ones that like transcend just the way we apply it to our work selves, that they're actually able to transform and improve the parts of our life that mean the most to us, which are our families and the people that we love. And so I think that's just an awesome example. Thanks for sharing that.
That's exactly why I wanted to hype it. I feel like as folks that work in tech, it's always inspiring to come across something that actually is changing people's lives in a really deep and meaningful way. And this little application has done that for my daughter. And so I thought it was worthy of a hype.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that.
All right. So, Chris, you are up next. So, same deal. I'm going to put a minute on the clock. I will let you know when you have 30 seconds, when you have 10 seconds, and then when your time is up. So, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Your time starts now.
I'm going to go back to Suno.ai, which is a product that uses AI and a simple prompt to generate a quick song clip. And that song can be about anything you want in any style that you want. And specifically, I use it to make up songs to sing with my son. And that's because I think we should not be constrained by legacy nursery rhymes. I think that they're outdated. And I think that kids deserve to have deeply personal songs being made about them, even when their parents have very little musical talent to demonstrate. I'm also a huge fan of a bunch of genres that nursery rhymes have never made it to, like disco. And so if you are someone who is in need of high niche nursery rhymes, I don't think that would have been possible without, contracting an actual band to create those songs for you. So Suno.ai.
Fantastic. All right, Ruth, any thoughts?
Well, I love that you also chose an example that has touched your life and your family and your child. And Chris, I'm going to ask that you send me the sound clip of you doing a disco nursery rhyme with your son.
I will absolutely do that.
So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us this segment of Generation AI. To those of you listening, please like this episode, subscribe so that you don't miss future episodes. You can find us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Chris, thank you so much. And where can our listeners find you if they want to learn more about you or HubSpot?
If you want to learn more about HubSpot, go to hubspot.com or follow HubSpot on X. And if you want to reach out to me, find me on LinkedIn, Christopher Miller. Thank you so much for having me, Ruth.
You've been listening to Generation AI,
Automating Better Business,
a show from LivePerson.
Never miss an episode by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast player. Please give us a rating, leave a comment, and share the episodes you love. Until next time.